And that's what you have to find out. What's important to them? And do I give them space to express that in my program?
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Hal Wilson. Dr. Wilson is currently a Georgia Southern University Associate Professor of Coaching Education. Dr. Wilson has 27 years of coaching experience from youth to the NCAA Division I Power 5 level in a number of sports, including basketball, football, soccer, and softball. To hear his full bio, check out part 1 of this conversation, which I'd highly recommend you do before listening to this episode. In part 2 of this conversation, we dive into holistic athlete-centered coaching, the appropriate integration of spirituality in coaching, and the importance of lifelong learning. And as always, if you'd like to get the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Wilson. Enjoy the episode. Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Hal Wilson. I would highly encourage you to go back and dive into part 1. Dr. Wilson talked extensively on leadership, the 3 M's, lifelong learning, and more. It's one you don't want to miss. Dr. Wilson, let's start off this conversation and talk about holistic athlete-centered coaching. That's kind of a mouthful. Can you tell us what that means and what it looks like in our coaching, why it's important?
Yeah, that's why people don't trust eggheads in higher ed. They're like, what? What are those words even mean? My grandma would call those 50-cent words. And that's why, like, for example, growth mindset, everybody knows now. Growth mindset. Well, growth mindset is not what that was originally called. There was fancy language like that. So I call it now holistic athlete-centered coaching. I call complete coaching. All right. Are you coaching the complete player? If you think about holistic, every person has multiple parts. They're not just the athlete part. It's not just the physical. It's not just the psychological trying to motivate them, right? But there's a spiritual component. And this is people of any faith or lack of a formal faith, but there is something that's important to them. And that's what you have to find out. What's important to them? And do I give them space to express that in my program? Not trying to force them cookie cutter into one specific way. So that's an important part. What am I doing? Like, for example, I mean, when I was a varsity girls coach, because I had, connections here in town, like I brought in sports psychologists. I brought in exercise physiologists to do functional movement screenings. I used all these resources to show them I'm going to do everything I can to help you be your best. I don't know everything. I brought in a sports nutritionist to talk about sports nutrition. Now, and she is an expert and she's fantastic. But I mean, I taught high school health for a long time. I don't think there was any information that she gave that I hadn't taught in a high school health class. However, sometimes hearing the same message from an outside source, especially an expert, gets through where they drown you out and they're tired of hearing your voice. So holistic athlete-centered coach. So the official definition is an intentional consideration of all aspects of athletes' personal development while leading the athletes to strive to reach their potential. Because my college coach taught me potential gets you beat. So many times you look at, oh, that kid, man, they've got potential. And then if players get you beat, if they play hard, if they're focused, if they're ready today. And it's easy, especially when I was a young coach, to get suckered in to the kid with the high ceiling that doesn't work hard and overlook the kid, that maybe doesn't have as high a ceiling, but will give you more on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's really good. Would you read that quote one more time? It's the intentional consideration of all athletes.
Intentional consideration of all aspects of athletes' personal development while leading the athletes to strive to reach their potential. So there's a couple, important things. Is obviously the intentionality. I'm looking at all parts of it. I am leading them, so I am trying to influence them, and to strive to reach their potential. Because the opposite is what I call a conquest coach. A conquest coach is just all about the conquest. It's all about the ring. It's all about the trophy. It's always about there's some defined outcome. And that's the only thing that matters. And once I get that outcome, I'm done with you. I'll bring my next group in. A holistic athlete centered or a complete coach looks at the complete player. They understand that this sport is important, but it's one piece of their life. Are they playing other sports? Do you encourage them to play other sports? Or do you tell them, but you better get in the gym this off season the whole time? Playing multiple sports is important. Coaching multiple sports is important. I do research on that as well and how that can help you in whatever sport. If you have a primary sport, like for me, basketball is my primary sport, but coaching other sports helped me both learn how to teach and it gave me new ways to teach. And it helped me connect with kids that played multiple sports. And the kids that played multiple sports might have different roles. They might be the best softball player, but the fifth best basketball player. So now they know what it's like to be the best player. There's so many different reasons you can look at that. But your sport, is it extracurricular or co-curricular? What are the lifelong skills that they're taking with them that are going to help them beyond their sport? And that's what you got to care about if you're holistic, because the Greek concept of holism, that the sum is greater than the parts, and you even say that you can't separate the parts. Right? You can't take the kid. Let's take the emotional part out. Let's take the physical part out. And we're going to go in the weight room today. We're going to do physical only. Really? I've coached in the weight room. You better be emotionally ready in the weight room. You better be intellectually ready and know what you're doing in the weight room. So it's all integrated. And so you're going to have that in a way that you're trying to help them. Again, strive, key word, strive to reach that goal. And I know you're an English teacher. I used to be an English teacher. Cervantes' famous quote about the journey is better than the end. INN. The journey is better than the end. The journey, right, is that competition. It's along the way. It's the preparation. Right? It's the process. The INN, is the end, END. It's the outcome. It's the goal. If you're lucky enough to win a championship, I remember we won a state championship, and I had wanted to win a state championship so bad for so long, and we finally get one. And I remember stopping at McDonald's on the way home after the game and just being like, okay. I mean, that was fun. It was great, but all right, what now? And I say all the time, my state championship rings, my college championship rings, none of them have ever written me a letter, sent me a note, anything. But the kids do, the players do. I had a player message me 17 years after I coached him when he was 11 in AAU. And then he had gone on to be a junior college All-American, and he sends me a message out of the blue, and he tells me that I will give them written evaluations. He says, I still have that on my wall at home from 17 years ago. I never, ever thought they would keep it, much less for 17 years. Right? So it's the little things that you do that you care about. I would always ask my players every year, what's the most important thing this year that helps you get better? What made the biggest difference? And I would practice my JV and varsity together when I was varsity coach. And I had a kid who was a freshman on JV, never played varsity, but we were in the gym together. And he says, Coach, remember that day you stayed after practice and worked with me on my shot? Absolutely not. I had zero recollection of that. Could not remember that at all. But that was the one thing that kid remembered that made the biggest difference that year. So there's not some grand thing. You got to do these magic things. It is little, small, but you have to have an intentional effort that I'm going to care about you. Like you have a kid that's in a play. Go see the play. Right? Whatever it is, be interested in their other interests. If you want them to be interested in your interest in the team, they're not just a basketball player or whatever sport it might be.
That's really good. Yeah, that's so good. Can we talk just for a minute about a conquest coach? You mentioned the opposite of a complete coaching or holistic athlete-centered coaching.
Yep.
It's all about the outcome. They discard these athletes when they're done with them. It's really just about how can these athletes serve me and my goals. I guess my question here is this: if I'm a coach listening and
Because I think if we're honest, we all can have these tendencies, right? We all can moments where maybe we act like a conquest coach, or right, these inclinations. But if I'm a coach that is realizing, man, I've been a conquest coach instead of an athlete centered coach. Um, what advice would you give to someone that's having those realizations?
Go back to the first M in legacy, right? What's your motive? Do you have a pure motive? Are you honest enough to look at it? Because again, it's good to want to win. That is a good thing. It is good to compete. It is not good to cheat, to intentionally injure, to break the rules from eligibility, to do anything to try and win. That's not good. So, how do we harness the positive power of competition? It's just like you have two players, and they're one's a little bit above the other one. Well, if the ones who's a little bit below, if they don't compete, then there's nobody pushing that higher level player. So now they're not going to work a little bit harder. But if that lower player works a little and it's getting a little bit better, then like, oh man, I better get go. So they both get better, and so the team gets better. So we have healthy competition. And now I go back into culture. You asked about like what are some ideas? How do you celebrate that? I had a big cowbell in practice. We would chart drills. If you set a personal record in these things we charted, or we had established a standard of success. Right? Like there was a shooting drill. And if you got a certain one, then you were a green light shooter. You could shoot if you were open within reason, right? And so either way, you either met the standard or you improved, you got to go ring that cowbell. And then at first I'm like, I don't know. Are they going to think this is cheesy? And I actually stole that idea from my after school literacy program I helped with when I was in college. And I have never seen kids sprint to get a cowbell faster in my life than after we'd done it for a while. And one day I didn't bring it out right away. Where's the cowbell, coach? Where's the cowbell? I mean, they are ringing that thing. And the rule was if somebody rings the cowbell, everybody has to stop and everybody has to cheer like we just won the national championship. We have to celebrate each other. This was with high school, varsity, right? And
That's
they got
good.
into
Honestly, I was hoping that you were going to say everyone has to moo like a cow.
well, hey, take it whatever fits your context. I don't know. But yeah.
That's awesome. No, that's awesome. What a great example. Yeah, I think that advice there is really good, right? If you have those realizations, I've really been more of a conquest coach. It's about coming back to that motive, being honest with yourself, like you talked about too. It's that personal reflection. Why are you doing this? Where do you want to go? You also alluded to it earlier around spirituality and coaching. And I know another topic we're going to talk about is just the appropriate integration of spirituality and coaching. Could you define what that means and then talk about why it's important?
I think it's a topic people are scared of. It's just like anything, because I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing or somebody's going to think differently and be offended. And to me, it goes back to that holistic care of the athlete. To some athletes, their spirituality or their faith is important to them. And if it is important to them, they should be allowed to express that no matter what it is. And I coached in a very diverse area. I had Hindu players, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, I mean, everything. Right? And so I wanted every kid. Now, I'm a devout Christian. It's a very, very important part of my life. But the analogy I always use is a coat. And especially most of my career, I was in public schools. So the rules are a little different in public versus private schools. Right. But the coat analogy is my window back here, my parking lot. If I pull in my parking lot and I have a coat, some people look at your spirituality or your faith beliefs as like this coat. And some people say, well, you better leave that coat in the car. Don't bring it into work. And that's neither legal nor true nor effective. Right? You should be your whole authentic self. Right? I can bring my coat in. I can wear my coat in. What I can't and shouldn't do is make you wear my coat. I can't make you or coerce you to believe the way I believe, right? Because that can be traumatic to that person. But I can create an environment, like for example, when I had a Hindu player and we would talk about pregame meal, right? Instead of saying, well, what are the restrictions? Let's talk about it as a team. And so now we know, because when you don't know, because you're ignorant, your mind goes to the worst things or you fill in the blanks. So talking about things openly is so, so important. And depending on what part of the country you're on, I mean, there's strong, I've always coached in the South, right? So it's you look at the population leans more Christian. but you have to have a space. Like when I left one of my jobs to go get my doctorate, actually, one of the nicest letters I got was from that Jewish mom of the Jewish player I had, because we made space for his beliefs to do what he needed to do to be a whole person for him. So now when I ask him, hey, I got to have more out of you here on the basketball court, they're more willing to do it because I've let you be you. Now I need you to do this on the court. And it's not trading. It's not a coercive. It's not, but no, I sincerely want you to be the best you can be. I want you to be comfortable. I want to be comfortable as a coach. I would tell my parents in our parents meeting, you're not going to play any more or less based on your faith, but I want you to know this motivates me in a lot of my decision making. And I know that saying this is going to put a bull's on my back, and you're going to say, "Oh, you said you're a Christian," but I'm going to put it out there, right? Because that's who I am, and I want your child, and I want you to feel comfortable with the way you are, whatever your beliefs are or lack of beliefs. Right? I'm not going to try and make your kid uh, feel the way I would do, but there's opportunities, and it opens up opportunities to have good conversations that a lot of people are scared to have, which causes problems when you never talk about it.
Yeah, it's I appreciate you sharing that and your perspective and experience with it. And yeah, as someone who's faith and yeah, Christianity is a huge part of my life, a big motive for me as well. And also being in public schools, it is kind of one that even personally, I felt like it's kind of a can be one, yeah, that people feel uncomfortable with. So I respect massively, um, yeah, how you handled it, and it's even got me thinking, how can I handle this in an authentic way, right? And in a way
Can I
that
make a couple other
yeah,
points? That, like,
yeah,
when things
absolutely.
go bad, like for several years, I was a court appointed special advocate for kids in foster care, which means there's a kid, you would go and you look at where they're living with the foster kid. The goal of foster care is to reunite them with their natural parents. If it's a safe place, that's what we want. So I have to examine the foster care, first of all. How's the situation there? How's the kids adjusting? Work with the kids. And you go to court, you write up a report, right? You interact with the parents. Here's what the parents working on. Here's the progress, and you make a recommendation to the judge. Well, as part of the training, right, to be a court appointed special advocate, some parts of the country they call them a GAL, a guardian ad litem. Um, that's a part of the holistic care of that kid. You're supposed to talk about the spiritual piece. Why? Because that kid is in trauma. They've been removed from their home because it's not safe for them. So you're supposed to talk about that. It's a part of the training. When people go through traumatic events, it's okay. When DeMar Hamlin collapses on the field with the Bills and both teams come together and pray and the announcers are praying on TV, I'm sure people complained somewhere, but I didn't hear a whole lot of complaints about it. Right? Why? Because it was a traumatic event. So I've gone through training for mental health first aid and trauma informed teaching and all these kind of things. And it's part of that as well. If someone's going through a mental health issue, the spiritual aspect is a big part. And it's been empirically proven to have positive benefits, physical, mental, emotional benefits for people who believe that. Not people that don't, but people believe that way. I mean, it's been proven. So why would I deny them those benefits if that is their belief? If mental health first aid says it's okay, trauma informed teaching says it's okay, court appointed special advocates say it's okay, common sense says it's okay, why would I be afraid to bring it up when it's not a traumatic situation? It just has to be done appropriately. And again, you can't make them wear your coat. Now, and here's why. So I did a study of coaches I told you about. So how does it influence the coach when you're allowed to be your authentic self? There were three themes. Now think about how hard coaching is. At any level, coaching is hard. Any level. But you move up, research shows you get more stress, more external pressure, right? Well, these coaches that had these Christian beliefs had a sense of peace. Do you think that makes them a more effective coach? If you have peace. When I interviewed Pat Summitt's players, they all talked about her poise under pressure. There's a connection to that. They had a sense of perspective. They understood, like our earlier discussion, that this is a piece of their life. It's not their life. Even if your shirt says whatever your sport is life, whatever, it's not your life. It's a part of your life. So I have a broader perspective, which allows me to focus on the process more easily in that journey versus the end. And then I have a sense of responsibility for the other people, not just me, right? That authentic, sincere care, because that's part of that Christian ethic. So those coaches, they all didn't win. In fact, one of the coaches in the study got fired He knew he was going to get fired, but he had a peace because he said, I did my best. This is the Lord's will. I'm going to trust him. The next door is going to be a good door for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really good stuff. One of the last topics I want to talk about with you, Dr. Wilson, and you alluded to it at the beginning of our conversation, part one, was that not only are you a professor teaching these classes, but you're also coaching your kids. And I think that's one of the things that was the most appealing to me about this conversation, knowing that, yeah, you're in higher ed, you're studying it, you're researching it, and you're doing it. Would you talk about advice that you would give to people who are coaching their kids?
Right. So I was part of a white paper. Sport Coach America is the organization. It's free. They put out a white paper on coaching your own kids that had some tips. I would you can put that in your show notes for sure. I don't have that in front of me, but here's what I would say from my personal experience. You have to have a conversation. Like with my kids, I ask them off the field, off the court, whatever, because I've coached them in flag football, softball, volleyball, basketball. Um, do you want me to be dad right now, or do you want me to be coach? Because there's a difference. Because the problem is most parents on the ride home, because research shows the ride home is the reason 70% of kids roughly drop out of sports by age 13 is because of the ride home. Well, you didn't play hard. You didn't run that out. Or you didn't. The parents are giving them a hard time because they care about them. They want them to do well. They just don't express it in the right way. So, do you want me to be a parent or do you want me to be coach? Now, my oldest, most of the time, she says be coach. That's the way she's wired, and she wants that feedback. But if they're wanting you to be parent and just support them, just say, "Hey, I love watching you play," or "Man, that was a tough loss. How are you feeling about that?" Hey, but I loved watching you. Do they want that? And instead, they're getting, "You didn't run out that grounder. What were you thinking? Or why did you take that shot?" They're wanting a parent, they're wanting that support, and they're getting the coach. That's where you get that disconnect, and the kids get disillusioned. So that would be the number one. And I've told that, and I've had parent slash coaches come back to me and tell me what a difference that has made. It seems really simple, but getting it out there, because it's hard to coach your own kid. Because when you're coaching your own kid, you have the daddy ball stereotype where I'm going to have my kid's going to get the premier position in the sport or whatever it might be. How do you guard against that? Well, you have to be willing to take a realistic, evaluation. How do you have stats to back it up? Like when I was coaching varsity girls and we were charting all these things, here's the numbers, right? Now there's more to playing than numbers, but do I have something? Are you lucky enough that, like, I just got finished coaching my 11-year-old softball team? I was lucky enough we had 4 coaches, and so when the coaches said, "Hey, we want your daughter to pitch and your daughter to bat leadoff," and I'm like, well, honestly, I was like, I don't know if she's, maybe one or the other. I don't want her to do both because I don't want people to think, it's daddy ball. But having that conversation with the kid as well, because every kid is unique. Are they the kind of kid that wants hard coaching, can take it? Because I've seen a lot of people coach their own kid, and they're harder on their own kid because like, oh, well, they know and they can take it. Well, maybe they can, maybe they can't. That's an individual thing. But more often than not, they haven't asked. They just assume that because we want it so bad. Because we complain about other parents. We say, look, how well your kid plays is not a reflection of your worth. But then as a coach, it's the same thing. Because I've seen people, well, how can you shoot like that and be a coach's kid? How can your form be that bad or whatever? So it's a fine line. But the problem is nobody wants to coach because why do you want to get fussed at and yelled at? Our time, I don't have, everybody's busy when you can have such a huge impact on your community by coaching. So I'm thankful for all the parents that do coach, but it goes back to your motive. Why are you doing it? Did you start this AAU team just so your kid could have a team? Well, maybe that's a good thing because you want them to have the experience. Did you start this AAU team so your kid could get all the shots? I don't know if your motives is pure about that, right? So always having that self-reflection because it is hard, and just knowing you're going to get criticized anyway. If you're a coach and you have no kids on the team, all the experts are in the stands, right? So what's right for this group of kids right now?
That's good stuff. Yeah, it's so true. You're gonna get criticized. Better be ready for it. Well, Dr. Wilson, this has been a fantastic two-part conversation. Before we wrap it up and hop off, will you share with the listeners two things? One, where they can connect with you, and then two, where can they learn more about your guys' program at Georgia Southern?
Right. We're on every social media, you know, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. It's GS for Georgia Southern, GS Coach Ed. Just trying to keep it short, as in coaching education. GS Coach Ed. If you look us up there, we put out videos, graphics, motivational stuff. You can also find information, excuse me, on the program. Or if you just Google Georgia Southern Coaching Education, there's information on our masters. Again, it's any coach, anywhere. We've got 30 states and countries, 13-month, 10 classes, and I think it'll make a big difference. So I would love to, and personally, I'm just Coach Hal Wilson is my handle, Coach Hal Wilson. I would love to connect with anyone. Let me tell you one last quick thing. So I was a varsity head coach. Felt I was being led in a different direction. I quit my job, sold my truck, sold everything I owned. I had a less than 1-year-old daughter. We moved states so I could go pursue my PhD. Right, not knowing where we would end up. Spot opens back up at Georgia Southern in our coaching education program. I don't think it's a coincidence. My passion is investing in coaches because coaches changed my life. And so if I can do anything to help any coach out there, please do not hesitate to reach out. Even if you're not interested in the Masters, you just want to talk coaching anytime. That's why I've enjoyed, Luke, chatting with you and what you do. And I went back and listened to a bunch of the podcasts. And man, you've had some big time people, and it's been really, really good stuff. So thank you so much for allowing me to be on.
Dr. Wilson, you're the man. Thanks for your time.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Dr. Wilson for joining me. You can find links to connect with Dr. Wilson or learn more about Georgia Southern's program and the show details. And don't forget to check out the show details if you'd like to get access to the free podcast notes or learn more about how we serve coaches. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week.